Thank you so much for the invitation to be here, and it's just been a pleasure to watch so many smart people already this morning talk about this. Jason Tim over there, raise your hand, Jason, is also a colleague of ours. He's finishing up his doctorate in linguistics, and he's extraordinarily good at Tableau and some of the other stuff we're going to show you. So we wanted to acknowledge him as well. Amy and I are going to sort of tag team for about the next 20, 25 minutes. And we've got a couple of points to make. One is, and you've heard these themes come out a little bit already this morning, the importance of really thinking about the problems that people are trying to address. And we're going to talk about that. The second is doing analyses that are actionable, that people can use to make a difference. And then the third is just cool data visualization. How you take complex data and present it in ways that are making a difference. We're going to take Martin Luther King's quote on the purpose of education as sort of the organizing theme of our talk. And I know you can read, but I want to highlight a couple of parts of it. To save man from the morass of propaganda, in my opinion, is one of the chief aims of education. Education must enable one to sift and weigh evidence, to discern the true from the false, the real from the unreal, and the facts from the fiction. The function of education is to think intensively and critically. The most dangerous criminal may be the man gifted with reason but no morals. We must remember that intelligence is not enough. Intelligence plus character. And we like geospatial mapping, and you'll see some examples of that, because we focus on the major educational issues facing our state, our community, and I imagine your communities as well, and that's equity, educational achievement and attainment, early childhood health, juvenile justice, economic development, and in New Mexico, this is such an issue for us and for many of you as well, is just intergenerational poverty. Tate and Hogreb, and there's some references in the back, talk about the importance of a visual political literacy. And we think that is important because what they point out is that when you put maps and illustrations and images and graphic representations up, it hits a different part of the brain. It's not so much the Excel spreadsheets, but people of all levels, of all educational levels, of all languages, just really respond to that, and they get very engaged in the civic debates. And that's what we're interested in using data for. Geospatial mapping has been used in lots of other fields. Epidemiology, for example. We haven't used it so much in education. And as we do these maps with different communities in our state, it just brings people to the table immediately, and you get this sort of gut reaction. And the other thing that is so interesting is people look at these maps and they want to know, what do you see in it? What do you see in it? What do you see in it? And it really facilitates conversation. We sort of approach, and the first speaker kind of had the same kind of approach to the issues, so it was very reinforcing for us to think about it. We listen to what the issues are. Then we try and make the data accessible to all audiences. Then we do some cool analyses. How do you make it actionable? And then how do you take action from that? How do you use it as a basis for advocacy? How do you use it to strengthen public engagement? How do you see if you've actually made an impact? So Amy's going to talk a little bit about the issues, and then we'll show you a bunch of way cool visual images.
Way cool.
Way cool.
Alrighty, so that was a great introduction, and what we're going to talk about now is some of the specific issues that we have in New Mexico, but that certainly all of us have to think about wherever we live. New Mexico, for those of you who don't live there, which is probably most of you, we end up on the bottom of a lot of lists, and we're a very poor state. We have some unique challenges, as does everyone else. But part of what we really need to do with our data is not sink into a morass of despair, but to really sort of coach the narratives at how we want to portray our state, look for the positive things as well as the challenges. So that's always kind of something that we try to keep in the forefront. Not always easy. So to start with, and I mean in no way to disparage the Annie E. Casey Foundation, there are a lot of rankings that come out. And one thing we want to do in education is think about who are the students who are succeeding, why are they succeeding, how are different subpopulations doing. A very popular means to try to get at that has been the use of socioeconomic status sort of well-being indicators. So this is an example. This is a map that shows, obviously, the entire country. And in the 2013 rankings, New Mexico was number 50, so dead last. So what the narrative around this is that we're very challenged in providing an environment for our children that suggests that they're being prepared for their opportunities in the best way possible. And this is not an isolated phenomenon with this low ranking. I've done this is how my brain works. When I see this kind of data, I have to get right into it. But New Mexico has never risen above number 43 in these rankings. And we tend to be dwelling down very, very low. So here I've compared some of the rankings across the states. And you can just see New Mexico, we don't have a lot of variance in our ranking. We're all kind of just locked in there down at the bottom. So just quickly, because something, again, we think about a lot is using indicators and how to present data. The indicators that are used to create this particular index are census-based, okay? And that's fine. The data that we use around our education policy research is frequently publicly available data. That's a challenge. Sometimes this data is very useful, sometimes not so much. But these are the specific indicators that are used in this index. And some of the questions we start to ask might be, what does the data that we're using really mean for states that look different in terms of possibly demographics and things? And that's a story that doesn't get out there a whole bunch. So just being mindful of where data comes from and the stories that you're telling with it is something that can be very powerful and can create sort of a narrative of disadvantage in some cases. There's some good things, though. So at a high level, I think this type of data presentation helps us identify improvement, areas for improvement. It's easily understandable. People look at that quickly. It's a snapshot that they can digest. There's a consistent form of measurement. It can be done annually, and it is revised from time to time to incorporate new data sets. Actually, that happened in 2012. But again, the cons are that it can create a narrative of disadvantage. Using states as the unit of analysis can mask a lot of nuances, so that's something we like to think about too. The scale that we present our data at has a lot to do with how it looks. Doesn't take anything into account about sort of subpopulations or improvement among those groups, and it doesn't consider the unique assets within communities. So what that can lead to is something Peter's going to talk about quickly.
Thank you. So if you look sort of at the background, we get this steady drumbeat in the newspapers and TV about New Mexico. Severe child abuse cases pile up in Albuquerque. New Mexico is still battling teen pregnancy. New Mexico's child death rate increases. And what you get is this just sense of despair and finger pointing and sort of a sense of learned hopelessness. And how do you bring a community together and present data in ways that are powerful enough to say we've got issues, but not in ways that overwhelm people and just make them hopeless. So what we've done is, and I'm going to let Amy talk about this part, we've started to change the data, the way we look at data, so that we can actually change the narrative.
Okay, so this gets back to just telling the specific story we want to tell. One thing we can do, and as a person who comes from the mapping realm, that's my background, we can change the unit that we're looking at, change the unit of analysis to tell a more nuanced picture. We're going to be focusing here on New Mexico's specific concerns when we're working with policy. That's mainly what we're up to. We want to create a new narrative that can focus on success and opportunity, not always, because we do have to have those hard conversations about the challenges, but when possible. And then develop tools to strengthen the civic debates. So you're going to actually see a lot of sort of canned static maps in this first part of the presentation. We're going to move on later into the way that we've addressed this last issue of making interactive tools that people can do this. So quickly, to go back to indices for a minute, what we have done, instead of using, always using the index that shows New Mexico and, how bad we're doing, we also like to use some indexes that present the data at a more fine-grained level. So one of these would be a census tract-based opportunity index. This one happens to be established by the Centers for Disease Control. They have some indicators that have been used to suggest that certain areas might provide better opportunities for students. So when we look at that for our individual county, we can see that there's actually quite a lot of nuance across childhood opportunity in our area. Again, these are stories, we all know our own cities, and we know where different things are going on. But when you start to break these down and look at the individual data pieces, some very interesting conversations can start. And this would be just a combined index of all of those factors. So we bring it all together for people to look at. And finally, we can bring in additional layers that might show, well, where are the high numbers of Hispanic children in relation to these areas of opportunity? So again, this is every data story is loaded. What you choose to look at, how you choose to present it, are all going to have ramifications. But this is one area, one way that you can help communities talk about their specific concerns.
All right. Amy made an important point about sort of the static maps, and I want to just make an observation. We do lots of presentations in front of legislative committees, and legislative committees are often made up of old people with bad eyes. And I actually laughed about the panel earlier saying, all you have to do is do 3 clicks and then you're in the data. These people don't click. And so as you all are doing really good visuals and interactive things on smartphones and smart pads, remember you've got smart people but who don't use technology. And when you get to policymakers, often hard copy of a map makes a big difference. So in the quote, Martin Luther King talked about the worthy objectives. So we want to give you some examples of some of the analysis we have done in New Mexico with worthy objectives. Those of you who, this is Albuquerque. I-25 goes right down the center, I-40 goes across. There's the South Valley, and then up in what's called the Northeast Heights. And this is percentage of individuals living below the poverty level with less than a high school education, to start to show some of the disparities in our neighborhood. This is a huge one. This is percent of mothers without a high school diploma by New Mexico school district. And this is so crucial because mothers' level of education is one of the best predictors for how kids are going to do. This is 3rd grade reading. This is by proficiency, by ethnic group. And what you see in red are less than 50% of the kids proficient in 3rd grade reading, which is very predictive of what's going to happen later in school, and a very powerful argument for more early childhood education. And what you see there in the bottom slide is where Native Americans are, and you see that disparity. You see Hispanics along the border and up along the side. The eastern seaboard of New Mexico generally does pretty well. It's right next to Texas for some reason. I don't understand that. But you can start to see some real differences there. This is a huge issue for us, youth suicide. New Mexico really suffers from youth suicide, particularly among Native Americans. And the red there is higher than the national average and the state average. This is a powerful conversation starter. This is percent of 16 or 19-year-olds not in school or in the labor force by county. And if kids aren't working and they're not in school, they're at your home breaking in. So this is really an important conversation starter. Now, I want to show you this one. This has been huge. This is percentage of Albuquerque high school students who have had sexual intercourse. We use the youth risk and resiliency data. Most states have a similar one. This is very powerful data. Now, by a show of hands, how many of you had sex during high school? All right.
Boundaries.
Yes, I'd like to talk to you later. No, did I say that out loud?
Boundaries.
Okay, I'm sorry. And on tape too. Oh my Lord. This is where once kids have sex, those of you that have a PhD know it often leads to babies. And this is the birth rate by New Mexico in Albuquerque. But this is where all the early childhood centers are. So that's where the babies are. That's where the early childhood centers are. This is a very powerful kind of analytic that shows where are the needs, where are the resources, and then where are the gaps. And we've been working with the Department of Health, CYFD, Children, Youth, and Families to do priority investment zones across New Mexico. But if I'm a policymaker and you're asking for more money for child development centers, one of my questions is, where are you going to put it? So those are some examples. We're going to talk about changing the narrative, again, from despair and hopelessness to one that energizes people, tells them for real what the issues are, like suicide, like teen pregnancy, unwanted teen pregnancy, but does it in such a way that doesn't overwhelm them. So this is what we have in New Mexico. This is a great cartoon, and it is everybody blaming everybody. And I know this doesn't happen in other states, but it really happens in New Mexico. And how do we use data to get people from blaming everybody to actually sit down, come together as a community, and try and address their challenges? Amy?
So one way we can do that is by reminding people that the kids in our state, in our city, in our neighborhoods, their success is really important to all of us for the good of the state, for the good of society. So kind of, again, tying this data to places that people can relate to and understand and taking it down to that level is pretty important. So another thing that we can do is look for the bright spots within the not so happy stories. In our state, we do focus a lot on disparities in education outcomes between student subpopulations. We have a very large Hispanic population. We have a large Native American population, smaller African American. But you do see, and then also you can think about things like students with disabilities and just low SES students in general. We do see a lot of disparity among those groups, and of course we all see that. So one thing we can do is look for some positive stories within these problematic areas. So what we're looking at here, and we're just changing gears a little bit, this is Tableau, and this is actually a screenshot from Tableau. We'll look at some live things later. But what we're looking at here is the story of advanced placement data in Albuquerque public high schools. And what we've done here is we've looked at for different subgroups, how their AP engagement, either as enrollment in classes, taking a test, or passing a test, relates to their overall enrollment at a school. So that's kind of what we're looking at. So on the right there, that graph, you can see starting over here, this is the percent that the subgroup represents of overall enrollment at the school. And then this is the percent that the subgroup represents in AP enrollment. And you can see for Hispanic students, we have a little dip there. And then of the percent that are enrolled of Hispanic, how many take the test, you can see that we have the Hispanic trajectory, we're going up there. And then also they pass at a pretty good rate. So that's a positive story to tell within the data that might not otherwise come out. And again, this actually is an interactive tool, not the way we're looking at it right this second, but I'm working up my courage to get in there live and do it. No, we're going to look at that later. But we also have a map, and the map also shows by high school attendance boundaries how schools are doing in terms of their disparities between enrollment and AP course engagement. So can we look at this, what kind of stories can we see here? I think this is a powerful kind of tool for folks to look at. And you can also look at this by year, different years, select different subpopulations, et cetera. We have some special traits in our state. We have some unique things. We have a large bilingual population or English language learning students. Now, that can cause a lot of issues because we have some difficulties sometimes with reading and things like that, and how do we even teach these students in the most effective way? But really, that is that can be a gift. That could be a huge asset for students. So focusing on bilingualism always as a challenge, or English language learners as a challenged group, not always the best narrative. The better narrative might be to figure out how we can cultivate that and use that in positive ways. And this is just a map that shows a 4-year graduation rate for English language learners, class of 2013. So again, just a map showing that. Another sort of unique thing you see in New Mexico is the presence of multi-generational households. So this is a kind of something we don't think about a lot, but can be a very unique asset to the community.
Yeah, I'm going to just step in just for a second. One of the things that we do a lot is we map where all the issues are. We map the risks, and again, that's sort of the mentality that you see. So we've been working really hard on trying to map the assets. And assets the normal way, but in Hispanic cultures in the South Valley, multi-generational households are one of the rich cultural assets. So how do we introduce that? I'll let you go. Great. And we've got about 5 more minutes.
Okay. And another thing we can do to change to a more positive narrative, something we've done a lot of, is looking at beating the odds. So schools that are beating the odds in some way. Elementary student mobility is a pretty strong predictor for students that are not going to do as well. So what we're looking at here is just a visual correlation of elementary schools that are rated very highly, and then the red in the background would be areas where there's a lot of student mobility. Well, what about those places where we see a very successful school and we still see a very mobile student population? What's going on at those schools? What can we learn from those schools? And what's going on in those communities and those families? In a related way, we can look at high schools where we have both high graduation rates and then low remediation rates for those students going on to college, but in areas of high poverty. What are the schools doing that are very successful regardless of the fact that they are in these areas? And sometimes you want to tell the story of change. Rather than just saying we have high truancy rates in high school, we say we have high truancy rates, but look at the improvement that's happened. So if that's another way to tell kind of a positive story about what's going on. Okay, so finally here. Kind of a new thing for us, and I come from a very strong GIS background. When I came in, I was like, let's map everything. But we really have changed gears a little bit into Tableau world. And I've had some great conversations here already about this tool. It's been really great for us. We're not web programmers. We don't really want to be. We want to focus on the data. But this tool, Tableau, and certainly others like it, are really helping us develop some interesting interactive tools for folks to use and present data. Peter mentioned this particular survey before. This is the Youth Risk and Resiliency Survey. So what this survey does is it asks adolescents how they're doing across a broad range of domains on a bunch of different indicators. So that data, you can get it, you can download it, here it is in a spreadsheet, but what do I do with it? What we've been able to do is build some really interesting tools that can help people really explore that data. And this is a direction we're really moving to strongly, and it's been just great. The challenge is getting these tools to the right people, and especially in terms of policymakers who aren't super savvy with this stuff, but we're going there. You laugh, yeah, you're like, good luck, lady. Okay, so as an example, and I have to give big shout out to my colleague Jason over there, who's very retiring, but he really has worked so hard on this and really brought us into a new new world of data visualization here. So what you can do with this tool, for example, is select a student subpopulation by grade or by gender in this case. And then you can select a category of indicators. So these indicators are around things either like caring relationships in the home, alcohol and substance abuse, etc. And if I can just choose drugs here, and then I can go to a sub-indicator such as cocaine use or something, but this is going to show me by county how the different counties are doing. And also, down at the bottom, then we've created some tools that can show comparisons between grade levels and genders. So this really kind of brings this data to life. I mean, more than just having it on a map or just having it on a bar chart. This particular tool is on our website also, so that's been wonderful. You can get a little bit fancier with this, or a little more. This would be a slightly higher end thing, but what's really cool here is that you can compare indicators. So you can look at sort of how indicators correlate with how these would sort of correlate with each other by just doing sort of a scatter plot, getting a p-value. So selecting, for example, in my home there's a parent who believes I will be a success, and then I plan to go to college after high school. You can see we have a positive relationship, statistically significant, and you can also see how the counties are doing. And you can choose from any of the indicators. Now you might say, those of you who are heavy-duty stats folks, this is fishing, this is, okay, but it gets conversations started. It's meant to be something to just start a conversation. Let's see, we also have dashboards for race and ethnic disparity in terms of drug use or caring relationships, and again, choosing a sub-indicator. And you're able to see not just the response rate, but also the disparity between that group and other groups in terms of how the kids are responding to these questions. So it's really adding another level of empowering people to use this data in interesting ways. And I know a lot of people are doing this, and I feel like we're just learning even. We've been doing this for about a year, but it's been just a fabulous journey, and I really look forward to doing more of these kinds of visualizations in the future.
Will you put our last slide up?
I will. Oh, we have more
So
slides.
as you can tell, our enthusiasm is boundless, but our time is limited. So we're going to stop here. We've got a last slide. And you guys are going to share all these presentations, yes? Okay.
Yes.
There's our CEPR at unm.edu, CEPR at .unm.edu, and there's a bunch of our slides with lots of maps, and across the top you can see the data visualization, so you can actually get on and see that. And we'll end up by just saying this. Already this morning, I think there are some really important themes coming out. One is the importance of doing meaningful work. You heard it in the first presentation. You heard it throughout. What are the issues people are addressing? How do you bring people over to do the good? What are the worthy objectives? The second is just displaying the data isn't enough. You've got to do analytics that actually give people a sense of how do we address these issues. And third, this is the very beginning of a magnificent field. And Paul, for you to pull us all together, for us to be able to explore this field is just very visionary. So thank you so much for that.